Hello folks, this is Miss Knappenberger with the third installment of our poetry packet. Today we are going to be talking about Hope is the Thing with Feathers by Emily Dickinson. So this poem and many of Emily Dickinson's poems rely very heavily on metaphor. Metaphor is a figure of speech or a literary device where you compare two unlike things using the verb to be. Is, was, am, are, will be. So examples, Juliet is the sun. Is Juliet a gigantic burning ball of gas? No. But we are comparing Juliet and the sun using the verb to be because we understand that everybody else will also understand that Juliet is not actually a gigantic star in the sky. Poor Romeo would have been just vaporized. But she shines brightly, he turns toward her, he considers her to be the source of light and life, so he's making that comparison. All our words are but crumbs that fall down from the feast of the mind. I like that. I like the idea that your mind has a whole feast, but all that you can get out through your words is just the crumbs, and it's really only a hint of what's really going on in your brain. Conscience is a man's compass. So the compass of a man is his conscience. An extended metaphor is one that keeps coming up all throughout a poem or another piece of work, any kind of piece of work. So for example, in the novel To Kill a Mockingbird, the mockingbird is a metaphor for one of the characters in the book, and it's a constant theme throughout the book. So in this poem, what is the thing with feathers? A bird, and so a bird is our metaphor for hope, or hope is our metaphor for the bird. This poem is written by Emily Dickinson. Emily Dickinson is an American poet. She was born in 1830 and she died in 1886. She lived in Amherst, Massachusetts. You can actually still go to her house and you can see where she lived, where she went to school, all of that fun stuff. She was famous for never marrying, for often wearing white and only white, and for hardly ever leaving the house. There was a point in her life where she wouldn't even necessarily leave her bedroom. She would talk to visitors and guests through the door of her bedroom, and she became very famous for never leaving. She did also carry on a correspondence, or correspondences with lots of friends. A correspondence is when you write letters back and forth to each other. She was very good friends with a lot of other time period, and they wrote letters back and forth, but she never went to visit them. She was published during her lifetime, but not super widely, and she wasn't very widely famous for her poetry, but during her lifetime, she wrote over 1,800 poems. And her sister is the one who is responsible for publishing most of those poems after her death. Emily Dickinson spent many years of her life compiling all of her poems into these books, which then she asked her younger sister to burn after her death, and fortunately for us, her younger sister ignored her and published them instead. Emily Dickinson's poems are usually titled after their first line, and occasionally numbered, but most of the time they don't have like a separate title. Their title is just the first line of the poem. When in doubt and you don't see a title, the title is the first line of the poem. So I'll read the whole thing and then we'll go through it stanza by stanza. So, Hope is the Thing with Feathers by Emily Dickinson. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. And sweetest in the gale is heard, and sore must be the storm that could abash the little bird that kept so many warm. I've heard it in the chillest land and on the strangest sea, yet never, in extremity, it asked a crumb of me. Some things you'll notice about Emily Dickinson's poems is that she very often uses these dashes These are not hyphens, they're little dashes, essentially commas, and they're used for stylistic purposes. You might also notice that some of the words are capitalized. I don't think this is necessarily her thinking that these words are more important. I think it's more of a holdover in English from when we were more of a Germanic language. You will notice the further back you go in history with the English language that the more capitalization follows more German rules than it does modern English rules. All right, let's go stanza by stanza. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. Notice that soul and all don't really rhyme with my accent, but remember that Emily Dickinson was living in the 1800s in the northeastern United States. So I'm not completely sure what that accent would sound like, but it would not sound like my accent. So when I say soul and all, it's very different than how she would have said it. Now, what does this mean? This means that hope flies into your soul like a bird. When Dickinson says, and sings the tune without the words, maybe she means it's because hope isn't always and doesn't need to be specific. It's this sort of big, vague feeling that is very indescribable in a lot of ways, and therefore easy for everybody to understand. When she says, and never stops, it probably refers to the fact that a person can feel and experience hope even in the most extreme of circumstances. And hope comes to people always. Hope has always existed, and hope always will exist in humans, which is a beautiful idea. I also like the idea that your soul is kind of like a cage, because if you think more literally about like your rib cage, I love this imagery of the bird coming and sort of settling in your chest cavity and your rib cage is this cage that the bird is perching in. A little macabre, but that's okay. And sweetest in the gale is heard, and sore must be the storm that could abash the little bird that kept so many warm. Really quickly, a couple vocabulary things. When they say the gale, they mean gale is used as a word to describe a really, really strong wind or a storm, which is why it's kind of funny in The Wizard of Oz that Dorothy's last name is Gale, Dorothy Gale, because she gets to Oz on a wind with the tornado. So, a little bit of wordplay there. And sore must be the storm. In this context, sore means like strong or extreme. So the storm has to be really, really, really strong to abash the little bird that kept so many warm. Abash is a word that is related to bashful, and it means to destroy the self-confidence of somebody or destroy the confidence of somebody. So there is basically no storm that is strong enough to kill hope. Hope will exist no matter how sore this storm is, and it's sweetest in the gale. Hope is not really necessary in our day-to-day lives. You don't really need hope when you're doing the dishes. You need hope when you're going through these really difficult circumstances. So, again, the first line is saying that hope is the best emotion to feel during difficult times, and that the difficult times have to be really difficult to get rid of hope or to make it ineffective or to cause it to disappear. And then that fourth line that kept so many warm, it's showing that hope is a really positive feeling, because oftentimes these storms and these gales are cold and uncomfortable, wind, rain, snow sort of a thing, and hope is what keeps the people warm through the gale, the physical one, and it keeps you physically warm, but then hope keeps you emotionally warm and cozy and satisfied during difficult times. I've heard it in the chillest land and on the strangest sea, yet never, in extremity, it asked a crumb of me. I like this last stanza too. She's saying that hope is universal. I've heard it in the chillest land and on the strangest sea. She's trying to create these two ends of a scale, the chillest land and the strangest sea. She heard it from one end of the earth to the other. And hope asks, I'm sorry, I had to stretch. Hope asks for nothing in return. It's an emotion that only gives, it does not take. Hope only gives people things. Extremity is a fancy word to describe a very intense situation. So she's essentially saying that hope is universal and it has never asked her to give something back to it. Hope only gives to her. Hope does not require her to sacrifice something or to give something back or to receive something in exchange for giving a human hope. So extremity also is going to imply a really intensely difficult or hard situation. Okay, so since Emily Dickinson's poems are a little bit short, I've included a couple extra at the end, and then I'll give you sort of a funny thing very at the end. So this one is called Fame is a Bee because that's its first line. Fame is a bee. It has a song. It has a sting. Ah, too, it has a wing. So essentially, she is comparing fame to a bee in that it has a song, it has this sweetness to it, because you might occasionally be afraid of a bee. I understand, because it has that sting, but the buzzing of bees has often been compared to songs and the song of nature, and when you hear bees out there, you know that they're off doing pretty positive things, all things considered. Pollinating flowers and spreading pollen and love and joy. Oh, I love bees. It has a sting, so fame has positives. You can spread your message, you can interact with people, you can have an impact on people's lives, but it has a sting as well, because how do you know that you're impacting somebody's life positively? You can never really truly know that. You can never know how somebody is going to respond to you. And being famous comes with drawbacks as well. When you're famous, you can't just do anything you want. Everybody is watching and everybody sees you and everybody is looking for you. So you can't just, if you're famous, you can't just go to the grocery store. You have to, send someone to go with you or to go for you, because what if you go and people recognize you and then they want to talk to you? And then, too, it has a wing. Fame is usually impermanent. Eventually, everybody becomes less famous, or fame leaves them. So, fame, it comes, it might have some positives, it might have some negatives, and it will also leave. This one is called The Moon is Distant from the Sea, because that's the first line. The moon is distant from the sea, and yet, with amber hands, she leads him, docile as a boy, along appointed sands. He never misses a degree, obedient to her eye. He comes just so far, toward the town, just so far, goes away. Oh, Signor, thine the amber hand, and mine the distant sea. Obedient to the least command, thine eyes impose on me. So I like this poem because not only is she making these comparisons between the moon as a woman who has amber hands and is leading almost like a mother this boy along the sands, and the boy is very obedient and follows her in everything that she asks him to do, but then also she brings in her own life experience. Oh, Signor, thine the amber hand and mine the distant sea. I do whatever you want. And again, too, it's this really nice thing because they're connected, but it doesn't feel like the moon is forcing the sea to do anything. It's a gentle leading. She leads him docile as a boy, and he just goes along with it because he wants to. So likewise, she is obedient, not because she has to be or because she's being punished if she's disobedient, but because she wants to. Obedient to the least command thine eyes impose on me. So essentially she's saying that any hint of a command from this seigneur, and she will rush to be obedient to that command because she wants to. Not because she's forced to, but because she wants to. The very last thing is that a lot of Emily Dickinson's poems are written in this specific sort of rhythm that fits really nicely to the theme song for Gilligan's Island. And once you know that, it's really hard not to sing many of her poems. So if I were you, I would first off look up the Gilligan's Island theme song, and then I would look up Because I Could Not Stop for Death, and then see if you can sing Because I Could Not Stop for Death to the Gilligan's Island theme song. If you don't know what Gilligan's Island is, well, lucky you, you have something to research now during quarantine. I personally prefer I Love Lucy to Gilligan's Island, even the Brady Bunch if I'm really bored, but hey, everybody's got their own different tastes. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day. Thanks for hanging out with me, folks, while we talk about Emily Dickinson and hope being the thing with feathers. Our next installment is going to be Themes for English B by Langston Hughes.